The first pop was dismissed. A firecracker, perhaps, tossed by a teenager from an alleyway, a juvenile punctuation mark to a day of wholesome celebration. The second pop, sharper and closer, snagged the attention of the crowd, heads turning like sunflowers seeking a malevolent new sun. The third, a flat, violent crack that echoed off the brick facades of Main Street, shattered the illusion of peace entirely. It was not a firecracker. It was a sound that belonged to the sterile, frantic corridors of Sarah Jenkins's emergency room, not to this sun-drenched Saturday in late May. Panic bloomed in an instant, a contagion of screams and shoving bodies. The vibrant tapestry of the annual Nines on Parade event ripped apart, its cheerful threads unraveling into chaos. Just moments before, the world had been a kaleidoscope of joy. Children with sticky cotton candy fingers waved miniature American flags. The air, thick with the scent of popcorn and summer asphalt, carried the happy barks of police dogs and the cheerful banter of their handlers. Sarah had been soaking it all in, a rare moment of stillness in a life defined by perpetual motion. The worn soles of her favorite running shoes, the ones that had absorbed the impact of countless miles on hard hospital linoleum, were planted firmly on the curb. A lukewarm coffee was clutched in her hand, a small luxury. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't Sarah Jenkins, ER nurse. She was just Sarah, a face in the crowd, a citizen of Springfield. She'd even helped a little boy, no older than 5, find his mother, his tear-streaked face dissolving into a grateful smile as he was enveloped in a hug. It was a small, simple act of kindness, an echo of the care she was trained to provide, but stripped of the life-or-death urgency. It felt good. Then the parade had started, a procession of anachronistic heroes, stoic officers and their magnificent canine partners. Her attention had been captured by a veteran canine officer in his 40s, his face weathered but kind, and the magnificent Belgian Malinois at his side. The dog, Rex, moved with the fluid grace of a coiled predator, yet his eyes, intelligent and warm, scanned the crowd with disciplined calm. "Thanks for coming out to support us," the officer, whose name tag read Davies, had said with a genuine smile as he passed her spot. "They're the real stars," Sarah had replied, nodding towards Rex. As if understanding, Rex had nudged his wet nose against her outstretched hand, a brief, warm connection that had made her heart ache with a familiar love for animals. It was a fleeting moment, a snapshot of peace before the world tore itself apart. Now, that peace was a distant memory. The crowd was a stampede. Sarah's ER training, a deep-seated programming that superseded fear, took over. While others ran away, propelled by primal instinct, she ducked behind a large concrete planter, her mind automatically shifting into triage mode. Assess, prioritize, act. Her gaze swept the street, not as a civilian searching for escape, but as a nurse searching for the wounded. She saw him then, the source of the chaos, a man in a dark, shapeless hoodie, his face a pale blur of rage and agitation. He was standing near the police line, a handgun held loosely in his grasp. He wasn't aiming at anyone in particular, he was just firing, spraying bullets into the festive air. Then, a cry of pain. Officer Davies. He buckled, clutching his leg, and went down hard on the asphalt. Simultaneously, Rex, acting on years of training to engage and neutralize, lunged forward. A pained yelp, a sound that cut through the human screams, ripped from the dog's throat as a bullet found him. He collapsed mid-stride, a heap of fur and muscle on the hot street. The shooter fumbled, his hands shaking as he tried to reload. The world seemed to slow, details sharpening into painful focus. Sarah saw Officer Davies, bleeding, trying to drag himself toward his fallen partner. She saw Rex, whimpering, his dark fur already matted with blood. She saw the fumbling hands of the shooter, the glint of the fresh magazine. In that heartbeat, a choice was made. It wasn't logical, it wasn't calculated. It was a pure, overwhelming surge of empathy and protective instinct. Her oath, the one she took when she first put on scrubs, wasn't about protecting just humans. It was about preserving life, alleviating suffering. And right there, on the broken pavement of Main Street, was a life slipping away. Sarah broke cover. She didn't run towards the wounded officer. Other cops were already converging on the shooter. She ran towards the dog. Her worn sneakers pounded the asphalt, each step a conscious decision to move into the line of fire. The world narrowed to a single point, the wounded animal, exposed and helpless. She reached him, her knees skidding on the rough ground, and without a second's hesitation, threw her body over his, curling herself into a protective shield. She felt the warmth of his body, the tremor of his pained breathing. She heard his low whine, a sound of confusion and agony. She looked up just in time to see the shooter raise his weapon again, his frantic eyes finding her. Then the world dissolved. A concussive, deafening roar. A brutal, sledgehammer impact against her shoulder that threw her head forward. 1. Another blow, lower down, a white-hot poker searing through her back. 2. A third, sharp and splintering, near her ribs. 3. A final, jarring punch that stole her breath entirely. 4. Her vision tunneled into a pinprick of light. The sounds of the world became a muffled, underwater hum. The last thing she registered was the wet, desperate whine of the dog beneath her, and the distant, satisfying thud of other officers finally bringing the chaos to an end. Then, the pinprick of light winked out, and there was only a vast, silent, and welcoming darkness. Consciousness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a flickering, faulty, fluorescent light. There were disjointed moments of blinding brightness and muffled voices, then long stretches of gray, painless oblivion. Time was a thick syrup she couldn't move through. The first thing she became aware of was the pain. It wasn't the sharp, acute pain of the impacts, but a dull, systemic fire that had settled deep in her bones and muscles. A constant, throbbing reminder. The second thing was the sound. A steady, rhythmic beep, 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 the metronome of the living. She knew that sound better than her own heartbeat. It was the soundtrack to her life's work. For the first time, she was the one it was measuring. She forced her eyelids open. They felt heavy, gritty, as if lined with sand. The world swam into a blurry focus. White ceiling tiles, an IV pole with its clear bags of fluid, the soft blue of hospital blankets. She was in a private room at Springfield General, home turf. "Welcome back, Sarah." The voice was calm, familiar. Sarah turned her head, a movement that sent a fresh wave of fire across her shoulder. "Doctor?" Anya Sharma stood by her bedside, her warm, intelligent eyes filled with a professional concern that softened into something else admiration. Dr. Sharma, the hospital's top trauma surgeon, was a legend. A woman who could piece back together the shattered victims of car wrecks and knife fights with the detached artistry of a master watchmaker. "Dr. Sharma?" Sarah's voice was a dry, unused croak. "Just Anya, for now," she said, her lips curving into a small, reassuring smile. She held up a chart. "You took 4 rounds, 9mm. 1 went clean through the deltoid in your left shoulder. The other 3 hit you in the back. By some miracle, they missed your spine and vital organs. Your fleece jacket, the thick tactical one you were wearing, probably slowed them down just enough. The angle of your body did the rest. It saved your life, Sarah. You're going to have a long, painful recovery, but you are going to recover." Sarah processed the words slowly. 4. She remembered the impacts, the brutal, distinct count of them. She had been right. "The dog?" she rasped, the question pushing past the fog of medication. Dr. Sharma's smile widened. "Rex is a fighter, just like you. He's stable. The vets are calling it a miracle." Her professional demeanor cracked for a moment. "What you did, Sarah, running towards the gun? Most people wouldn't have the courage. Most people don't have that in them." In that moment, Dr. Sharma wasn't just her surgeon. She was her first ally, a voice of reason and respect from within the very walls that would soon feel like a prison. Later that afternoon, another visitor arrived. Chloe, her best friend and a fellow ER nurse, burst into the room, her usual sarcastic wit replaced by a watery, red-eyed relief. "You absolute idiot," Chloe said, her voice thick with emotion as she gently squeezed Sarah's hand, careful to avoid the IV lines. "A hero, but an absolute certifiable idiot." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Good to see you too, Chloe." Chloe's presence was an anchor to her normal life, a reminder of late-night shifts fueled by bad coffee, of shared complaints about impossible patients, of the gallows humor that got them through the day. She filled the sterile silence of the room with news and gossip, grounding Sarah in the world she had almost left behind. But it was the third visitor who broke through the dam of her carefully controlled emotions. He appeared at her door late in the afternoon, a tall figure leaning heavily on a crutch, his uniform immaculate despite the bandage visible on his thigh. It was Officer Mike Davies. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her. His face, which had been so open and friendly at the parade, was now a mask of profound, almost painful gratitude. "Nurse Jenkins," he said, his voice husky. "Sarah." He limped into the room, his eyes never leaving hers. "They told me what you did. I saw you run." He swallowed hard, his composure cracking. The vet said Rex would have bled out in another minute. The round hit his femoral artery. Your pressure, just lying on him, it was the only thing that kept him with us. He sank into the visitor's chair, his head in his hands. "He's not just a dog, you know. He's my partner. He's family. He's saved my life twice. And you saved his." He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You didn't just save my partner, Sarah. You saved a part of me." Sarah felt the tears she hadn't known she was holding back begin to trace hot paths down her temples. All the pain, the fear, the confusion, it was all washed away in that moment by the raw sincerity of his words. Her action, that split-second instinctual decision, had meant something. It had been right. Before he left, Officer Davies reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, bronze-colored coin. He placed it gently on her bedside table. It was intricately detailed, with the image of a snarling Malinois and the words, "Springfield Police Canine Unit, Fidelis ad mortem." "Faithful unto death." "From the unit," he said softly. "You've earned it." After he was gone, Sarah lay in the quiet room, the weight of the coin on her table a tangible symbol of her choice. The pain in her body was immense, but the ache in her heart had eased. She was a hero. Everyone said so. The world, it seemed, was on her side. She was wrong. The first tremor of the coming earthquake arrived the next morning, disguised as a man in an ill-fitting suit. His name was Markham. He introduced himself as a representative from the hospital's risk management department, though he looked more like a high school vice principal, all nervous energy and cheap polyester. He carried a tablet computer like a shield and had a soft, placid voice that immediately set Sarah's teeth on edge. It was the voice of practiced, professional insincerity. He didn't bring flowers or platitudes. He brought paperwork. "Miss Jenkins," he began, avoiding her eyes and focusing on a spot on the wall behind her head. "On behalf of Springfield General, I want to express our concern for your current situation." He didn't say he was glad she was alive. He didn't call her a hero. He called her actions an unsanctioned, off-duty intervention. The words were cold, clinical, and utterly devoid of humanity. "We just need to get a preliminary statement for our records," he continued, his tone smooth and practiced. "It's just a formality for the insurance carriers. Helps keep everything clean." He tapped the screen of his tablet, and a digital form appeared. He swiveled it toward her. Sarah, still groggy from a fresh dose of morphine, squinted at the text. Most of it was standard legal jargon, but one clause leaped out at her, highlighted in bold. By signing this, the undersigned attests that all actions taken on May 28th were performed in the capacity of a private citizen, independent of and not representing Springfield General Hospital or its affiliates in any official or unofficial capacity. A small, cold knot formed in Sarah's stomach. "Why does this matter?" she asked, her voice stronger than she expected. "I was on my day off." Markham gave a tight, thin-lipped smile that was more of a grimace. "Exactly. That's what this clarifies. For liability purposes. The hospital has a duty to protect itself from legal exposure in complex public matters." The word complex hung in the air. He made her act of heroism sound like a messy legal problem he was being paid to clean up. He was talking about protecting the hospital, not its employee who was lying in one of its beds with 4 bullet holes in her body. I don't think I should sign anything right now," Sarah said, the fog in her brain starting to clear, replaced by a sharp, cold unease. "Not without reading it properly." Markham's placid expression didn't change, but a flicker of annoyance crossed his eyes. "Of course. Take your time. I'll just leave this with you." He placed the tablet on her rolling table, next to the 9 challenge coin. The two objects, one a symbol of honor and the other a symbol of cold calculation, sat side by side in stark contrast. He left as quietly as he had arrived, leaving behind a chill in the room that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The warmth from Officer Davies's visit had evaporated, replaced by a creeping dread. For the first time, Sarah felt a different kind of fear, not the fear of violence, but the fear of the faceless, bureaucratic machine she had dedicated her life to serving. That fear, however, was about to be obliterated by an astonishing display of solidarity. The next morning, Sarah was woken not by a nurse checking her vitals, but by a strange, low hum from outside her window. It was a sound she couldn't place, a collective energy that seemed to vibrate through the glass. Chloe was already there, standing at the window, her hand pressed against her mouth. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, you have to see this." Every movement was an agony of screaming muscles and torn tissue. But with Chloe's help, Sarah managed to sit up, then swing her legs over the side of the bed. Leaning heavily on her friend, she shuffled the few feet to the window, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked down at the street below, and the air left her lungs. The world had turned blue. Parade Street, the same street where she had almost died, was closed to traffic. From one end of the block to the other, it was filled with police officers. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a silent, unmoving sea of blue and black and brown uniforms. City cops, county sheriffs, state troopers, and dozens of canine officers, with their partners sitting stoically at their sides. There had to be hundreds of them, 500, maybe more. They weren't talking, they weren't holding signs, they were simply standing vigil, a silent, powerful testament. Her eyes scanned the crowd, panning across the diverse faces, men and women, young and old, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all united in a single, solemn purpose. Their expressions were not of pity, but of profound respect, gratitude, solidarity. And then she saw him. In the very front row, standing directly across from her window, was Officer Mike Davies. He was standing tall, without his crutch, his dress uniform impeccable. At his side, looking healthy and alert, sat Rex. As if sensing her gaze, Rex looked up directly at her third-floor window and let out a single, sharp, commanding bark that cut through the morning silence. It was the sound that broke her. Tears she didn't know she had left streamed down her face, hot and silent. The pain in her body was forgotten, eclipsed by an overwhelming wave of emotion, so powerful it made her knees weak. The corporate coldness of Markham, the sterile fear of the hospital room, it all melted away in the face of this beautiful, breathtaking display. They saw her. They understood. They were her people. This was the ultimate validation. This was the truth of what she had done. She was not a liability. She was not a complication. In the eyes of the men and women standing below, she was a hero. The image burned itself into her memory. The sea of blue, the stoic faces, the proud officer, and the magnificent dog who was alive because of her. It was the highest peak she would reach. A moment of pure, unadulterated inspiration. She would need to hold on to it, to cling to its memory with every fiber of her being, because the descent into the valley of institutional cruelty was about to begin. 2 days later, the true nature of her fight arrived in a whirlwind of expensive perfume and razor-sharp competence. Her name was Brenda Walsh. She was the chief administrator of Springfield General Hospital, and she moved with the serene, predatory grace of a shark gliding through water. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, her silver hair styled in a severe but flawless bob. Her smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry, bright and wide and utterly devoid of warmth. She entered Sarah's room and dismissed Chloe, who was in the middle of changing Sarah's dressings, with a simple, chillingly polite, "I need a moment alone with my employee. You can finish that later." Chloe shot Sarah a worried look before reluctantly gathering her supplies and leaving. "Sarah," Brenda began, pulling the visitor's chair close to the bed, her voice a smooth, modulated purr. "I've been reviewing your case. It's certainly generated a lot of attention." She gestured vaguely towards the window, as if the memory of the 500 officers was a piece of litter she wanted tidied up. "We need to talk about the optics of this situation." Optics. The word landed like a stone in Sarah's gut. "My actions, while I understand they are garnering a certain amount of public sentiment," Brenda continued, folding her hands neatly in her lap, "have created a significant liability issue for this hospital." Sarah stared at her, dumbfounded. "Liability? I saved a police officer's partner." Brenda's smile didn't waver. "You intervened in an active shooter situation, Sarah, a highly volatile police matter. In doing so, you violated the hospital's off-duty conduct policy. Section 4, subsection B. It expressly forbids employees from representing the hospital or utilizing their professional skills in unsanctioned medical scenarios outside of a Good Samaritan context, which this, given the extreme danger, does not fall under. She delivered the lines as if reciting a grocery list. You weren't a nurse in that moment, Sarah, according to policy. You were a civilian who willfully interfered. The air grew thick and heavy. Sarah could feel her heart starting to pound, a frantic drum against her bruised ribs. That's insane! It's a ridiculous technicality. It's the technicality our insurance carrier and legal team are focused on, Brenda countered, her voice losing its purr and gaining a sharp steel edge. And then she dropped the bombshell. Because you were in violation of hospital policy, your employee health insurance plan may not cover the full extent of your workplace-adjacent injuries. The review board is looking at it now. Furthermore, your claim for paid medical leave is also under review pending the outcome of the liability assessment. The room tilted. The words didn't make sense. Her insurance? Her medical leave? She had been shot 4 times saving a life, and the institution she had given years of her life to was threatening to abandon her over a paragraph in a handbook she'd never read. Brenda saw the shock and horror on Sarah's face and leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. My suggestion, Sarah, as your advocate here, is to let this die down. Don't talk to the media. Don't make a fuss. Let our PR team handle the narrative. We'll release a statement about the bravery of all first responders and quietly manage the situation internally. If you cooperate, things tend to go much more smoothly. The implication was as clear as it was monstrous. If you fight us, we will ruin you. We will drown you in medical debt and leave you to fend for yourself. The shock on Sarah's face slowly hardened into a cold, defiant anger. The image of the blue line flashed in her mind. The weight of the challenge coin. The gratitude in Officer Davies's eyes. I acted like a human being, Sarah said, her voice low and trembling with rage. I did my job. My real job. I saved a life. Brenda Walsh stood up, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from her pantsuit. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of unveiled, glacial disdain. You created a risk, she said, her voice ice-cold. A hospital is a business, Sarah. A multi-million-dollar business with stakeholders and a board of directors. And you, right now, with your messy, sentimental heroics, are bad for business. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight, crushing the air from Sarah's lungs. The battle lines had been drawn. If Brenda Walsh was the architect of Sarah's misery, Detective Miller was the foreman putting up the walls. He arrived the following day, a stark contrast to Walsh's polished malevolence. Miller was a man worn down by his job, his face a roadmap of cynicism etched into weary flesh. He carried a stained coffee mug in one hand and a notepad in the other, and his cheap sport coat smelled faintly of stale cigarettes. He didn't greet her with sympathy. He didn't even make eye contact for the first full minute he was in the room, choosing instead to survey it as if it were a crime scene. Ms. Jenkins, he said, finally looking at her. His eyes were flat, disinterested. Detective Miller, I need to take your official statement regarding the events of May 28th. Chloe, who had insisted on being present, stood protectively near the head of the bed. Miller ignored her. He pulled up the same chair Brenda Walsh had used and sat down, flipping open his notepad. His demeanor was not one of gratitude or even professional curiosity. It was one of profound annoyance. He was treating her not as a hero, not even as a victim, but as a civilian who had stepped in his sandbox and kicked sand everywhere. So, he began, his pen poised. Let's start from the beginning. Why did you leave a position of relative safety to approach an active shooter? The question was loaded, the premise already accusatory. I saw Officer Davies and his 9 were hit, Sarah explained, trying to keep her voice steady. My training is to render aid. Miller scribbled a note. Your training as a nurse? Or your training as a law enforcement officer? I'm a nurse. I saw a life in danger. You saw a police officer and a police canine, both of whom are trained to operate in hostile situations, engaged with a subject. And you, a civilian with no tactical training, decided to insert yourself into that equation. Is that correct? Each question was a subtle jab, designed to paint her as an emotional amateur who had gotten in the way. He wasn't interested in her motive. He was interested in her violation of his procedural world. Did you at any point touch or move the 9 unit from its original position after it was wounded? He asked. I shielded it with my body. So you made contact, you were on top of it. Did you check the officer? Did you attempt to secure the suspect's weapon? There wasn't time. Other officers were handling the shooter. The dog was bleeding out, Chloe interjected, her voice sharp with indignation. Miller shot her a withering glare. I'm interviewing the witness, ma'am. He turned back to Sarah. Are you aware that by entering an active crime scene and making contact with what could be considered evidence, the wounded canine, you could have compromised the integrity of the scene? Sarah stared at him, aghast. Compromised? I was trying to stop him from dying. Miller remained unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen on his notepad. The shooter's public defender is already making noise. They're going to claim that the police response was chaotic, that civilian interference distracted the officers and led to an improper takedown. They're going to look for any angle they can to discredit the official version of events. He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. You wanted to be a hero, ma'am. That's fine, but you might end up being the star witness for the defense. Your heroic act might be the very thing that helps this guy walk. The words were a punch to the gut, more painful than any of the bullets. He was twisting her selfless act into a weapon that could be used against the very people she had tried to help. He was poisoning her sacrifice, turning it into a legal quagmire. He closed his notepad. We'll be in touch if we have any more questions. He left without another word. Chloe rushed to Sarah's side, her face a mask of fury. That man is a monster, an absolute ghoul. But Sarah barely heard her. She was staring at the wall, at the world Detective Miller had created for her. A world where compassion was a contamination, where trying to save a life was an interference, where a hero was just another complication. The system's assault on Sarah Jenkins opened on a third front that evening, the court of public opinion. The weapon of choice was the 6 o'clock news, and the man pulling the trigger was Donnie Price. Price was a local news reporter for Channel 8, a man whose ambition vastly outstripped his talent. He had aggressively coiffed hair, teeth that were too white, and a smarmy, self-satisfied smirk he probably practiced in the mirror. He specialized in turning minor city council disputes into epic political scandals, and thrived on the kind of controversy that generated clicks and ratings. Sarah's story was a goldmine. The segment opened with dramatic music and a flashy graphic, a silhouette of a nurse superimposed over a shattered police shield. The headline, in bold, aggressive font, read, Hero Nurse or Reckless Vigilant? Good evening, Donnie Price began, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. The story of Sarah Jenkins, the Springfield nurse shot while shielding a police dog, has captured the hearts of our city. But tonight, Channel 8 asks the tough questions. Was her dramatic intervention an act of heroism or a dangerous miscalculation that put more lives at risk? The screen cut to a shot of Springfield General. While the public has rushed to praise Jenkins, Price narrated, her own employer seems less certain. He then played a clip of an interview with an anonymous hospital source, a woman whose face was blurred and voice was distorted, but whose choice of words was chillingly familiar. We cannot comment on the specific actions of employees acting outside of their professional capacity, the distorted voice said. Springfield General has stringent protocols in place to ensure patient and public safety. It was Brenda Walsh's corporate speak filtered through a digital haze. Next, Price ambushed Detective Miller outside police headquarters. Detective, can you comment on the role of civilian Sarah Jenkins in the Parade Street shooting? Miller, looking annoyed, gave a clipped, It's an ongoing investigation. Price turned back to the camera, his expression grave. An ongoing investigation. Sources tell Channel 8 that police have serious questions about Jenkins's role and whether her interference complicated their response. He conveniently failed to mention the 500-officer vigil. He didn't show the picture of the Canine Unit Challenge coin that had gone viral on police social media pages. He presented a narrative stripped of all context, focusing only on the seeds of doubt planted by Walsh and Miller. The segment concluded with Price posing a rhetorical question to his viewers. In a world that needs heroes, we must also ask, when does a desire to help cross the line into dangerous recklessness? I'm Donnie Price for Channel 8 News. Lying in her hospital bed, watching the broadcast on the small television mounted to the wall, Sarah felt a profound sense of helplessness. They were stealing her story. They were taking the purest, most selfless thing she had ever done and twisting it into something ugly and contentious. The proof came moments later, when Chloe scrolled through the news station's Facebook page on her phone. The comments section was a cesspool. She should have stayed out of the way. Let the police do their jobs. Sounds like she just wanted attention. Hero complex. My cousin is a cop and he says people like this just make things worse. Why was she running toward a gun? Something doesn't add up. Of course, there were defenders, many of them identifying themselves as nurses, vets, or police supporters. But the poison had been introduced into the bloodstream of public discourse. The rage bait was working perfectly. The heroic narrative that had culminated in the beautiful, silent tribute of the Blue Line was being systematically dismantled, lie by calculated lie. Sarah Jenkins was no longer just a patient, recovering from grievous wounds. She was a pawn in a game she didn't know how to play. Discharge from the hospital was not the liberation Sarah had hoped for. It was merely a transfer from one prison to another. Her small, second-floor apartment, once a sanctuary from the chaos of the ER, now felt like a cage filled with obstacles. Every task was a monument to her new limitations. Making a cup of tea was an exhausting 10-minute ordeal. Changing her clothes required a level of pained contortion she hadn't thought possible. Sleep was a fleeting visitor, chased away by the constant, throbbing chorus of her healing body. Chloe had taken a week off to help her settle in, a gesture of friendship so profound it made Sarah's throat ache. But even Chloe's cheerful presence couldn't hold back the tide. The real world, in all its brutal, administrative indifference, began to arrive in the mail. The first envelope was from her health insurance provider, a subsidiary of the company that insured the hospital. The letter inside was a masterpiece of bureaucratic cruelty. It was thick with jargon like policy statutes, Clause C-17, and non-sanctioned activity. The message, buried in the third paragraph, was simple and devastating. Her claim for coverage of her hospital stay, surgeries, and ongoing physical therapy was officially denied. The reason cited was her violation of the employee off-duty conduct policy, the one Brenda Walsh had wielded like a weapon. Sarah read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. It was real. They were actually doing it. They were going to make her pay for the bullets that had torn through her body in the service of an ideal they claimed to uphold. The enclosed preliminary bill was for a figure so astronomical it seemed like a typo. It was more than she made in 3 years. 2 days later, the second letter arrived. This one was from Springfield General's Human Resources Department. It was shorter, more direct. Her request for paid medical leave had also been denied pending the final liability assessment. It politely informed her that she would have to use her accrued vacation and sick days to cover her absence. She had 3 weeks' worth. Her recovery was estimated to take at least 6 months. She was being financially and physically crippled by the very institution she had been so proud to work for. The weight of it was suffocating. She sat on her sofa, the letters scattered on the coffee table in front of her, and felt a despair so deep it was almost peaceful. They were going to win. The machine was too big, too powerful. That evening, as she was staring blankly at the wall, her doorbell rang. It was Officer Davies. He looked different out of uniform, more relaxed in jeans and a polo shirt, but the intensity in his eyes was the same. He held a bag of groceries in one hand. "Figured you might not be up for a shopping trip," he said with a small smile. He saw the letters on her coffee table, saw the look on her face, and his smile vanished. "What is that?" Sarah explained it all, her voice flat and emotionless. The story of Brenda Walsh, Detective Miller, the insurance denial, the leave denial. As she spoke, she watched the gratitude on Mike Davies' face curdle into a cold, hard fury. "That's unacceptable," he said, his voice a low growl. "They can't do that." "They are," Sarah replied with a shrug that sent a jolt of pain through her shoulder. He paced her small living room for a moment, a lion in a cage. "No, we're not going to let them." He pulled out his phone, his thumbs moving with fierce purpose. He turned the screen to her. It was a GoFundMe page. The title, in big bold letters, read, "Support Sarah Jenkins, a true hero." The photo was a picture of him and a healthy-looking Rex, both of them beaming at the camera. The description was written by Davies himself. It told the real story, the one Donnie Price had twisted. It detailed her selfless act, her grievous injuries, and the subsequent abandonment by her employer. It was a direct, unapologetic call to arms. "It's not much yet," Davies said. "I just put it up an hour ago, sent it to everyone in the department, a few guys I know in the state police, the National Canine Association." Sarah looked at the page. The first few donations were already there. 50 from a Skeet Henderson. 100 from the East Springfield PBA, 25 from a retired officer. The names were a roll call of the blue line that had stood vigil for her. For the first time in days, a crack appeared in the wall of her despair. It was a small glimmer of hope, a signal fire lit in the darkness. The system was fighting her, yes, but she wasn't entirely alone. The community she had saved a piece of was starting to fight back. The GoFundMe became Sarah's lifeline. Every day she watched the number climb, a digital testament to the decency of strangers. The story spread through law enforcement circles like wildfire. Donations poured in from police departments in California, Texas, Florida. A 9-unit in Canada sent $500. An association of retired detectives in New York sent $1,000. It was a grassroots rebellion against the cold calculus of Brenda Walsh. But with visibility came more unwanted attention. Donnie Price, sniffing out a new angle to his manufactured controversy, ran another segment. This time, the on-screen graphic showed a hand holding out a tin cup. The headline, "Hero Nurse Panhandling After Reckless Stunt." The controversial fundraising campaign for Sarah Jenkins has now topped $50,000, Price intoned, his voice oozing with concern, trolling sympathy. Raising serious questions about the ethics of profiting from a situation that many law enforcement experts still call problematic. He had found one retired, embittered police chief from another state to give him the soundbite he needed, completely ignoring the tidal wave of support from active duty officers. Watching the segment from her couch, something inside Sarah snapped. The despair, the fear, the helplessness, it all burned away in a sudden, clarifying flash of pure, cold rage. She was done being a victim. She was done letting other people tell her story. Brenda Walsh, Detective Miller, Donnie Price, they had picked a fight with the wrong nurse. The next afternoon, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Sarah, it's Anya Sharma." Sarah sat up, surprised to hear from her surgeon. "Dr. Sharma, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine with you medically," Dr. Sharma said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "I'm calling about something else. Something you might find interesting. Are you aware that the city council is holding a public commendation ceremony tomorrow night?" "No," Sarah said. "They're honoring Springfield General for its excellent and professional emergency response during the Parade Street shooting." "Dr. S/No," Sharma said, the sarcasm in her voice palpable. "And the keynote speaker, accepting the award on behalf of the hospital, is our very own Brenda Walsh." Sarah felt her blood run cold. A public commendation. It was a PR stunt of the highest order, a way for Walsh to publicly cement her narrative and whitewash her own cruelty. "Here's the interesting part," Dr. Sharma continued. "It's a public meeting, which means there's a 3-minute public comment period at the end. It's usually just for gadflies to complain about potholes." She paused. "It's a sham, a coronation for Walsh? But it could be something more for you, Sarah, if you felt up to it." The offer hung in the air, an opportunity, a public stage, a chance to confront her tormentor face to face. It was terrifying. It was perfect. "I'll be there," Sarah said, her voice firm, surprising even herself with its resolve. Her next call was to Officer Davies. She told him the plan. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then he said, his voice tight with determination, "If you go, you won't be alone." The City Hall Council chambers were packed. The air was thick with the scent of floor polish and civic importance. The room was a sea of suits, community leaders, and the ever-present gaggle of local media, their cameras poised like vultures. Donnie Price was front and center, a smug, predatory grin on his face, anticipating another night of curated drama. When Sarah walked in, a hush fell over the room. She moved slowly, leaning heavily on a simple wooden cane, a concession to the still healing nerves in her back. Chloe was at her side, a steadying presence. Sarah was pale, thinner than before, but her eyes burned with a fire that had been absent for weeks. She wore a simple gray dress, the only thing in her closet that didn't painfully constrict her shoulder. She looked not like a victim, but like a warrior arriving on the battlefield. As she made her way to a seat in the public gallery, she saw them. Dotted throughout the audience, in seats they had clearly saved, were dozens of uniformed police officers. They weren't in a single block, but scattered, a silent, pervasive presence. Each one she passed met her eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod of respect. At the grand oak dais, Brenda Walsh, who had been chatting amiably with the mayor, saw Sarah enter, For a split second, her professional mask slipped. A flicker of shock, of pure, unadulterated fury, flashed across her face before she could suppress it. Donnie Price's main camera, like a shark sensing blood, immediately swiveled from the dais and zoomed in on Sarah's face. The meeting began with tedious procedural matters. Then, the mayor, a portly man with a booming voice, began the commendation. He spoke in glowing terms about Springfield General, praising their unflappable professionalism and commitment to the community. Then he welcomed the hospital's chief administrator, Brenda Walsh, to the podium to accept the award and say a few words. Brenda glided to the microphone, her composure perfectly restored. She held the glass plaque, a symbol of a lie, and began her speech. It was a masterpiece of corporate self-congratulation. She praised her doctors, her nurses, her staff. She talked about protocols and procedures, and then she delivered the killing blow, a veiled but unmistakable attack aimed directly at Sarah. In times of crisis, Brenda said, her voice ringing with false sincerity, it is our training, our procedures, and our policies that save lives. We must always be wary of well-meaning, but ultimately misguided and dangerous, amateur interventions that can escalate an already volatile situation. It was a direct, public slap in the face. A gasp rippled through the officers in the audience. Sarah felt the blood rush to her cheeks, but she didn't flinch, she just waited. Finally, the mayor announced, "We now have a 10-minute period for public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to address the council?" Slowly, painfully, Sarah Jenkins got to her feet. Using her cane, she made her way to the public microphone at the side of the room. Every eye was on her. The silence in the chamber was absolute. She gripped the sides of the lectern to steady herself, took a deep breath, and looked directly at Brenda Walsh. She didn't yell. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but carried a profound authority that hushed the room. It was the voice of someone who had walked through fire. "My name is Sarah Jenkins," she began. "I'm a nurse at Springfield General, or at least I was. Ms. Walsh talks about policy. She talks about procedure. I'd like to talk about my oath." She paused, letting the words sink in. "My oath is to devote myself to the welfare of those committed to my care. It doesn't specify that they have to be human. It doesn't say I have to be on the clock. It doesn't mention liability or optics or what's good for business." Her gaze swept from Walsh to the council members. "On May 28th, I saw a member of our community, Officer Mike Davies, bleeding on the ground. I saw his partner, his family, Canine Rex, dying next to him. My policy is to help. My procedure is to show compassion. Ms. Walsh is right. A hospital is a business. But a community is a family. I was not acting as an employee of a business that day. I was acting as a member of this community. And I am not sorry." A smattering of applause started, but was quickly cut short by what happened next. From the back of the room, Officer Mike Davies stood up. He was in his full dress uniform. At his side, sitting proudly, was Rex. "Mr. Mayor, with all due respect to the council," Davies' voice boomed, clear and strong, "I'd like to add to her comment." The council, stunned into submission, could only nod. Davies walked to the center aisle, Rex trotting at his heel. He stood there, a powerful, uniformed figure, and looked directly at Brenda Walsh. "You're misguided amateur," he said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Put 4 bullets in her back to save my partner. Your liability is the only reason I'm not standing here today without him. The Springfield Police Department and every officer in this room does not consider her a liability. We consider her a hero, period." As he finished speaking, the officer sitting next to him stood up, then another, and another. Across the chamber, in a silent, cascading wave, every single uniformed officer rose to their feet. Over 100 of them. They didn't clap, they didn't cheer, they just stood. A unified, unwavering wall of blue, their eyes locked on the dais, a silent, damning judgment against the system. The visual was overwhelming. It was undeniable. Donnie Price's camera, which had been focused on Davies, frantically panned to capture Brenda Walsh's face. Her mask of composure had shattered completely. She was pale, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes wide with the dawning horror of a public relations nightmare from which there was no escape. The narrative had been irrevocably ripped from her control. In the silent, powerful testament of the standing officers, the truth had finally found its voice. The aftermath was a swift and brutal public relations execution. The video of Sarah's speech, Davies' testimony, and the silent, standing ovation of the police force didn't just go viral. It went supernova. It was the lead story on every national morning show the next day. The clip, titled "Nurse versus the System," had millions of views before lunch. Brenda Walsh's carefully constructed narrative of corporate responsibility was annihilated. The hospital's phone lines were flooded. The board of directors, who had been content to let Walsh handle her personnel issue quietly, were now facing a national firestorm. The GoFundMe, which had been steadily climbing, exploded. Donations poured in at a rate of thousands of dollars per minute. People weren't just donating. They were leaving messages of support, sharing their own stories of battles with insurance companies and callous bureaucracies. Sarah's personal fight had become a rallying cry for countless others. The consequences for the antagonists were swift. Within 48 hours, Springfield General's board announced that Brenda Walsh had been placed on indefinite administrative leave, a corporate euphemism for being fired in the most humiliating way possible. Donnie Price, whose sensationalist reporting was now viewed as a malicious attack on a genuine hero, was quietly reassigned. His new beat was covering town zoning meetings and high school bake sales. Channel 8 issued a weak on-air apology for their unbalanced coverage. Even Detective Miller felt the heat. An internal affairs inquiry was launched into his handling of the interview. A week after the council meeting, he found Sarah at a coffee shop. He didn't sit down. He just stood by her table, looking deeply uncomfortable. "My handling of your statement was by the book," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "But the book isn't always right, I'm sorry." It was a grudging apology, but a sincere one. The vindication for Sarah was total. The new interim hospital administration, desperate to staunch the bleeding, issued a formal, public apology. They retroactively approved her medical leave with full back pay and announced that every single one of her medical bills would be covered. 2 weeks later, they held a press conference to announce the creation of a new statewide policy, drafted in consultation with the Police Union and Nurses Association. It was called the Jenkins Protocol, and it explicitly protected all medical personnel in the state from professional or financial repercussions when rendering aid in off-duty emergencies. The final piece fell into place a month later. The news reported that the Parade Street shooter, whose lawyer had indeed tried to argue that civilian interference had compromised the scene, had his motion laughed out of court. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison. Justice, it turned out, could sometimes find its way through the noise. 6 months later, the world was green again. The late autumn sun was warm on Sarah's back as she stood in a wide, grassy field at the Springfield Canine Training Facility. She no longer needed a cane. The pain was mostly a memory, a ghost that sometimes whispered when the weather turned cold. The scars on her shoulder and back were a part of her now, a permanent map of her journey. She laughed, a full, easy sound, as she threw a bright red rubber ball across the field. A black and tan streak of pure energy and joy exploded after it. Rex, fully healed and more vibrant than ever, snatched the ball mid-bounce and came galloping back to her, his tail a blur of happiness. She had healed. Not just her body but her spirit. She hadn't returned to the ER. The thought of the hospital, even with Walsh gone, still left a bitter taste in her mouth. Instead, she was volunteering here, at the facility, helping with the new recruits, both human and canine. Officer Davies, now a close friend, walked up beside her, sipping a coffee. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Rex chew contentedly on his prize. They didn't talk about the incident, or the council meeting, or the media firestorm. They didn't need to. They talked about the new litter of German Shepherd puppies in the training program, and debated whether the department's coffee had gotten even worse. The feeling between them was one of deep abiding peace and shared purpose. "He's never been happier," Mike said, nodding at Rex. "You gave him that." "He gave me more," Sarah replied softly. She knelt down, and Rex immediately abandoned his ball to trot over and nudge his head into her chest, licking her chin with sloppy affection. Sarah buried her face in the thick, warm fur of his neck, breathing in the scent of dog and sunshine. She hugged him, this magnificent animal who had been the catalyst for the worst and best year of her life. The camera of this story would pull back now, showing the lone figure of a woman and a dog in the middle of a sprawling green field, a perfect image of peace. It would pull back further, revealing the other officers and their partners running drills, a community forged in trauma and rebuilt in loyalty. Sarah Jenkins didn't just survive. She hadn't just won. She had found a new family and, in fighting for her own integrity, had changed a flawed system for the better, ensuring the next person who chose compassion over protocol would be protected. The final on-screen text would be simple and clear. Sarah's GoFundMe raised over $500. After all her expenses were covered by the hospital, she used the remainder to establish the Guardian Fund, a national nonprofit that provides financial and legal support to civilian first responders targeted for their heroic actions. The story that had begun with rage, with the infuriating cruelty of a system protecting itself, ended here. Not with vengeance, but with enduring, hard-won inspiration.